is a compilation of 10 Black female authors who I recommend reading. The first book is called The Joys of Motherhood. It's this really interesting book set in Nigeria back in like the 1940s during the Second World War. And it's very much an experience of a woman who in the beginning is really trying hard to become a mother. And then when she eventually does become a mother, how her life changes and what her role as a mother becomes, and all of the complications that come with that, particularly living through poverty, living through colonial Nigeria at that time. But it's really deep and nuanced and complex and a very, very interesting read. The next one is by Toni Morrison. Of course, I would recommend pretty much everything by Toni Morrison. This one is called A Mercy, and it's a really short, easy to read, beautiful book. It's written from the perspective of a young girl it's written during the time of slavery. So she's a slave, and she thinks that her mother's kind of given her up, and it's really interesting and complicated and wonderfully written with deep characters. The next one that I have got here is called Small Island by Andrea Levy, and it's about what happened at the end of the Second World War, and then the UK was like calling Jamaican people to come over, and then that complicated relationship that Jamaica had as being part of the motherland and also separate from the motherland, and then the racism that people experienced when they came to the UK. So it's a really interesting book. Or again, it's about love and family and finding our place and resisting challenges within that. So I do really recommend reading this. The next one I've got is by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Again, fantastic author, and I would pretty much recommend everything by her. This one is called Purple Hibiscus, and if you haven't read this, then I definitely do recommend reading it. So it's about a young girl who's being brought up in Nigeria. So she's living like in a very academic family, an academic situation, and the complicated relationship that she has with various family members, particularly, and how that affects her and how she makes sense of everything within that. A really, really beautiful written book. The next one is called Nervous Conditions, and it's a really beautiful book. This time it's based in Zimbabwe, and it's the story of a young girl who's growing up and she's trying to access education, and the relationship that she has with the school and with the institutions around her, and how life is changing. It gives a really interesting and different perspective of Zimbabwe that you may not have necessarily read before. The next one is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. I would recommend pretty much everything by Alice Walker, and this book is particularly interesting for the different themes that it brings up, gender, sexuality, race, all written during the Civil War in the USA, and the different, the very circumcised roles that women had at that time, and how this particular protagonist manages to find peace and find a way forwards. So I recommend. The next one is called Transcendent Kingdom, and it's a really interesting story that I just recently finished about a young girl who's being brought up in the USA, and her family has come from Ghana, and it's about the relationship that she has with her mother and with her father and with her brother, and then with her work, because she's a neuroscientist and she's doing research at Stanford University, and she's learning about addiction, and her mother's suffering from depression, and it's about God and how to reconcile a belief in God with a belief in science, and it's about addiction, and it's about love, and it's about family. It's a really, really beautiful book, really, I think, different and interesting, and really, really well written. So I do recommend giving that a read. The next one I've got is called The Girl with the Louding Voice, which is a title that I really, really personally like. So again, this one is set in Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria has a massive influence on English culture, on English life, and on English fiction. Again, it's another story of a young girl trying to get education who is also being restricted by gender expectations. And I thought, when I first kind of read the blurb, I thought it was a little bit too kind of predictable, a little bit too what white people think that Nigeria is like. But it's not like that. It really does have depth and complexity and nuance within it, and really beautifully crafted characters. The next one is called The First Woman, and this is such a beautiful book. I absolutely love it. I love how she deals with themes of feminism, and how she deals with growing up and family, and how she also manages to evolve, because it's set during Uganda. And so it also brings in that political aspect of it as well. So I really, it's such a beautiful, beautiful book. And it's really, difficult to put down. So I recommend reading this one as well. The last one on my list is called The List, and it's a really fascinating book. It's by a British author, a Black British author, and it does deal with themes about being Black British, but also like being Black British and female, and then like abuse and gender and relationships and social media. So many incredibly interesting themes in this one, and I really, really, really recommend reading that if you have not done so already.